Please help me welcome Patty Tutite from Deloitte. She is the Managing Director for Transactions and Business Analytics, and Vicky Yen, who is the Senior Manager, Risk and Advisory from Deloitte.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks everybody. I was going to do a quick introduction. As Nicole said, Patty Tutite from Deloitte. I'm a Managing Director. Been with Deloitte since 2002, but in May I will wrap up 4 years in power and utilities. So started in a nuclear power plant for 5 years, did transmission and distribution line engineering for 13 years, did a small boutique firm and did power plant valuation, went to Deloitte, and I've been focused on all different kinds of tax incentives in the power and utility industry, as well as technical studies and valuation and modeling for power generation assets. So we're here to talk to you today about what Deloitte is seeing as the 2023 power and utilities outlook and a couple trends that we're seeing. So Vicky's going to lead us off with a discussion on renewable energy and do an introduction for herself as well.
Great. Thanks, Patty. Hi, everyone. My name is Vicky Yen. I'm a Senior Manager with Deloitte's advisory practice. I've been with Deloitte for about 15 years now, primarily focusing on the power utilities industry and renewable energy, and really helping our clients value renewable energy projects, and also advising corporates on sustainability strategies, and also looking at different renewable procurement to help them meet their sustainability goals.
Can you guys hear Vicky okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Do you want to hold the mic or do you want to put it in there?
Oh, yeah.
That's
That
up to
works
you.
too.
Whatever you want to do.
I feel it might be a bit too tall for me. So with that, let's take a look at our agenda today. So I will take us through the renewable energy outlooks, focusing on 5 key trends that we see are important in 2023. And Patty will then talk us through some of the key trends for power utilities. And then we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A session. So with that, let's begin. So before we dive into the 2023 outlook, let's just quickly review what we saw in 2022. So renewable energy growth continued in 2022, but it has slackened a bit during the year, with utility solar and wind capacity additions down 29% and 20% respectively in 2022 compared to prior year. And this was due to a number of factors. This includes rising costs and project delays due to supply chain disruptions and interconnection delays. And we expect to see many of these challenges continue through 2023, but we also see some of these strong growth drivers as indicated on this slide here. And for instance, despite the wind and solar costs rising for the first time in more than a decade, in more than a decade, but they are expected to still remain at the lowest cost of renewable energy source in most of the regions compared to natural gas, nuclear power, and coal generation. And then in the policy arena, we see that the state renewable portfolio standards continue to drive up the demand for renewables. And on the federal incentive side, we see a momentum stemming with the new IRA, or Investment Reduction Act, really driving up demand for renewables. We also see growth across different segments, from utilities, including renewables as part of their decarbonization strategies, to corporates pledging net zero emission goals, and residential customers really adopting rooftop solar to help them reduce energy costs and also power through outages. And as these demand continue to increase, we expect that it will bump up against some of the headwinds that we mentioned here, but evolving trends and opportunities in areas such as clean hydrogen and offshore wind, and some renewables are being brought into low-income community areas will really drive some of the trends for 2023 and beyond. So, and with that, here we show the key 5 trends that we're highlighting for 2023. They range from developing domestic manufacturing to support the renewable energy growth to new opportunities in clean hydrogen, to energy equity, cybersecurity, and offshore wind. So let's start with our first trend here, clean energy component manufacturing. So this is an important trend that we see because most of the equipment that are needed to deploy wind and solar projects in the US, such as solar panels, wind turbines, and towers and other components, is manufactured overseas, including the raw materials for those components. And the US manufacturing industry right now cannot meet the demand for renewable energy needs. So for instance, in 2021, we saw 5 gigawatt of solar PV modules being manufactured in the US, but that's well short of supporting more than 20 gigawatts of solar that were being installed in that same year. And in addition, to support and meet the administration's goal to develop 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, the US will really need to, they'll require more manufacturing in the US to really build out these wind projects. And also, US really also need to manufacture a lot more materials and components to support the green storage growth. Now we see the IRA, or Inflation Reduction Act, their tax incentives are beginning to incentivize some of these domestic manufacturing to support the needs, but really it's expected to take a couple more years, right, before the supply chain eases.
Or before you advance that. So one of the things that we're seeing that's important about this, manufacturing in the United States is the IRA offers investment tax credits associated with these renewable energy investments. And Vicky and I are the ones that kind of figure out what those investment tax credits are going to be based upon capital expenditure in the renewable energy field. And it typically was 30% of the investment was the tax credit, which a tax credit is different than a deduction. It's a credit right off your bottom line, right? If you're paying taxes, if you owe $1 million and you have $1 million in credits, you owe $0 to the federal government. And so what we're seeing in the IRA is that they're still giving you an opportunity to get that 30% investment tax credit, but they're putting requirements around that, and they're doing things like domestic content, which would be important for this manufacturing, and then also requirements like prevailing wage. And then also, if you have like an economic district where it's low income, you can get, and anyway, the way that it stands right now in the IRA, if you meet all of the requirements, domestic content, low income area, prevailing wage, you can qualify for up to 60% investment tax credit. So just thought that was interesting.
Yep. Thanks, Patty. So right, as Patty mentioned, the IRA could spell good news to the domestic renewable energy supply chain, but more in the long term. And as many sees, there are challenges, right now for another, couple of years before the supply chain eases. And as you can see on this slide here, there's a survey that Deloitte had fielded late last year. We reached out to over 70 executives and key senior leaders in the power and utilities industry to get their perspective on key trends and challenges. And as you can see, 56% of our respondents said that while the new incentives for domestic manufacturing could spur new production, it will take at least more than 2 to 3 years to ease supply chain challenges. And 18% of the respondents said that supply chain may not be able to keep up with the growing demand, while 15% said domestic manufacturing could fill the gaps. So now let's move on to our next slide, next trend here, opportunities in clean hydrogen. So currently, only 1% of the US hydrogen production could be called clean or green hydrogen, meaning it's being produced with low carbon emissions, such as through electrolysis using renewable generation or nuclear generation, powered electricity and water. And it's such a small percentage because it was not cost competitive compared to gray hydrogen, which uses fossil fuels to produce hydrogen with more carbon emissions. But that could change with the IRA's $3 per kilogram tax credit for eligible clean hydrogen production, which could make it price competitive with the higher carbon gray hydrogens. Now, there are still challenges such as lack of infrastructure that may make hydrogen still uneconomic for some applications, but with the tax credit, there could be open doors to renewable developers to benefit in 2023 and beyond. Now, currently, the annual demand for hydrogen is about 10 million metric tons. And most of these users are in the oil and petrol refining and processing industry, ammonia productions, food and pharmaceutical manufacturing. But as the transportation, electric power, and natural gas distribution sectors decarbonize, it's expected that the demand for hydrogen could increase. So now, how could we, or the renewable energy, unlock some of these clean hydrogen opportunities? So with the IRA's hydrogen tax credit and also the 2021 infrastructure bill that includes investments in different hydrogen hubs across the country, could really unlock some of these opportunities for renewable energy projects. And here we've listed some of the options that the industry could consider. And the first one, one of the options could be considering siting the electrolyzers near a current hydrogen user, such as the ammonia producers and food manufacturing that I mentioned earlier, because these hydrogen users already have existing infrastructure and market, so they could welcome opportunities to access low carbon alternatives compared to the gray hydrogen. And I would just highlight that producing clean hydrogen can use excess renewable energy, because right now those are currently being curtailed or sold to the market at low prices when the supply exceeds demand. The electrolyzers can also be used as a flexible load to help balance out the grid. And finally, the industry could also consider the site near ports to target a potentially growing clean ammonia export market.
So here I had something I wanted to add. Yeah. So hydrogen, everybody knows, is like a colorless gas, right? But it's kind of funny because there's all different colors associated with hydrogen. We have green hydrogen. Does anybody know what green hydrogen is? Go ahead.
Use electrolysis to develop the hydrogen.
Right, and then the electrolysis is powered by, if it's green hydrogen, it's powered by renewable energy sources, solar or wind. You have pink hydrogen. As a woman, it's my favorite hydrogen. But does anybody know what pink hydrogen is? It's hydrogen that is being generated by a nuclear power source. So nuclear is considered to be not clean because it has nuclear waste associated with it, but it has a zero carbon footprint. So then you have blue hydrogen and gray hydrogen, which Vicky mentioned before. And gray is just your typical hydrogen generation that doesn't really have anything renewable or zero carbon associated with it.
green hydrogen, what's the raw material? What are they?
Well, it's being, it's electrolysis, so it's splitting, yeah, water, that's right. But the electrolysis is a huge energy draw in order to split those. And the electrolysis in green hydrogen is powered by solar or wind. And then pink, like I said, is nuclear.
Right. Okay, so, great. So this is our next strand, which relates to opportunities in low-income communities. So as of up until now, the energy transition has mostly benefited more affluent Americans. You know, they benefited from tax incentives related to, for instance, rooftop solar plus storage and EVs. And this has often left some of the low-income communities behind. But this could change with the new federal policies such as the IRA, which includes additional incentives for projects that are located in low-income areas. The incentive includes environmental justice measures. So this could motivate some of the renewable energy developers to expand into low-income community areas. So for instance, projects that are eligible for 30% ITC or investment tax credit can potentially get an additional 10 to 20% bonus credit if the project is located in a qualifying environmental justice area. And we see that, you know, one of the business models that could really grow in the low-income community area is community solar. You know, this will allow some of the customers in those areas to lock in more predictable and affordable electricity rates. You know, makes families more financially secure while also improving air quality and providing local jobs. So we have surveyed, you know, some of the executives in the power utility space on their perspective around community areas. And as you can see here, almost half of them said that the company has plans to develop projects in low community areas and also, or to help low income customers procure renewable energy. And almost a quarter said they are developing these plans. So moving on to our next trend here, increasing cyber risks. So the utility sector has reportedly saw 46% year-over-year increase in cyber attacks in 2021. Now this averages about over 700 attacks per week. And as renewable energy deployment grows, these new resources are increasingly being targeted. And in the US, targeting both utility scale and distributed renewable energy resources. And we see that there's currently about 90 gigawatts of DER installed in the US, and including more than 3 million solar systems. Now, this is a significant challenge because these DERs are typically internet connected, and they're subject to very few, if any, cybersecurity requirements.
Does everybody know what a DER is? It's a distributed energy resource. So it's a small power plant, so to speak. Well, yeah, but it's a small power generation asset that's local to where the use is being consumed, where the power is being consumed. So distributed energy resource, DER.
Is it a particular form of energy?
Any kind of, because for solar we can have distributed energy, which would be just a small, like Vicky's saying, community solar, some small solar that is rooftop, maybe delivering power to a particular commercial building, things of that nature. So it's actually like local to where the use is being consumed. like I installed solar panels on my house, so that would be a distributed energy resource.
How about gas turbines or?
Sure, they have small micro turbines that can be installed around as well. Yeah. Whole bunch of different distributed energy, trying to get it so that you have the power where it's being consumed instead of having to have a big transmission and distribution infrastructure. I keep on interrupting Vicky.
Oh, no, it's good.
That's interesting.
So what does this mean in terms of for the industry? So as the cyber risk rises, a lot of the companies are stepping into, hire leaders and professionals that are skilled, experienced in information technology and security. But this could be a challenge in 2023 as we see growing shortage of these skilled workers in the field. As you can see on the slide here, the estimated 2020 gap that needs to be filled. And to fill this gap, some of the developers and companies are pursuing these skilled workers in other sectors, such as utility and manufacturing sectors. But, this challenge is, being seen across all industries. So some of the companies are really looking at developing their own skill sets, including, training their workforces to increase some of the workers with these type of skills. So then moving on to our final trend here, offshore wind. So the offshore wind development pipeline had grown to over 40 gigawatts by 2020, by mid-2022, it has grown to over 40 gigawatts across about 11 states. And offshore wind development pipeline is largely really driven by state procurement policies. Currently, there are 9 states collectively that have goals to deploy about 45 gigawatts of capacity by 2040. Now you can see in the chart on the left here, only about 42 megawatt of capacity are in operation today. And just under 1 gigawatt are actually under construction. So the vast majority of the capacity pipeline, about 40 gigawatts, are still in early stages of development. So that includes planning, site control, and permitting. And on this chart on the right here, you see the states with most of the wind project pipelines. So with New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey accounting for more than 50% of the wind capacity. Now California has projects that are under, currently in planning, but in very, very early stages of planning. And those projects will involve some floating wind turbines, versus compared to more traditional wind turbines that are fixed in the ocean floor. And those are usually seen in the shallower areas in the eastern coastal waters.
Hey, Vicky, can you explain what the site control is?
Oh yeah, so the site control is really, looking at the location to make sure that those areas actually can support the wind turbines. So for instance, in California, where the waters are deeper, right, you'll be able to do floating turbine technology, and these are fairly new technology, versus on the eastern coastal waters, which are shallower, they'll be able to put the turbine embedded into the ocean floor. But you need to be able to make sure that the location there does not have any, negative environmental impact, or, if there's any kind of sea life impact in those waters.
Yeah, and they went to auction with so like New York and Massachusetts, New Jersey, they went to auction for the land rights in the ocean right off their shores. And so we were kind of surprised well, maybe not surprised, but how expensive those land leases ended up selling for. So a lot of people are looking at these offshore winds and making investments in the ability to have site control for the different projects that they're planning.
Who owns the land?
It would be like BLM, Bureau of Land Management kind of thing, so it's considered to be governmental property, and whatever the agencies would be for the different areas, but it's federal government. Federal, yeah. That's a good question. If anybody has any questions while we're going, just raise your hand and ask.
Are you getting any pushback on the environmental problems with these renewables, such as turbine blades being made with oil-based products? You can't dispose of them,
Well, and I mean, here.
killing birds,
Yeah.
killing whales.
And so, I mean, pushback, Vicky and I are just consultants.
Sure. I mean, there's a perspective that I'm just.
No,
is there
right.
Any kind of challenge to it?
Oh, sure. So we're seeing a lot of challenges in that regard. What are you doing, like, with the waste that's being created by wind turbine generators? Because there's a lot of landfill being created by blades and things of that nature. And then also, I've been hearing reports about sea life, you know, being killed by destruction or construction on the seabed and things of that nature. So sure, those are all things. Every time I go to an onshore, because I haven't been to an offshore one yet, but every time I go to an onshore wind facility, I did my first wind project in 2004. They actually have a kohler that they keep, and they're so kind to share it with me, but they'll open up the kohler and show you all the dead birds that have been killed on site, because it's mandatory for them to keep them and store them, catalog them, and report to the agencies of that state, you know, what birds have been affected by the installation of the wind turbine generators, so.
Yeah.
How about just the aesthetic? What kind of, how are people, you know, the old not in my backyard philosophy, how's that slowing those projects?
I don't know if we have a lot of insight to that, because we're seeing a lot of projects being installed, but there's, so we will have on a project, because we're figuring out how much a power plant, how much, say, a wind project is worth, right? And so we'll have some exposure to some of the people that are building them, but they're building them on leased land, and so we might go visit a site and they will tell us, you know, not be careful, but be understanding of this person doesn't like people to be on their land when you're going to visit this site. So it's all leased land, and they are getting compensation for the lease. And the lease is there. They have a mandatory requirement to have an asset retirement obligation. So when somebody comes in and installs a wind facility, they're required to have plans to take that wind facility down when it reaches the end of its normal useful life. Yeah, and that's new, and so they also, the solar facilities are having asset retirement obligations as well.
So it kind of follows the whole drilling lease land philosophy, right? Where private citizens
Right.
are leasing their property.
Yeah.
That's
like
right.
they would to drilling.
Right, and they get royalties. In the case of solar or wind, they get lease payments during the operation of the facility.
Yeah. Okay, so while there are new opportunities for offshore wind projects, there are, you know, still a lot of challenges to address, because these are, you know, the first U.S. offshore wind projects, so they face a lot of financing and construction risks. You know, the need for new transmission, grid, and port infrastructures, as well as local manufacturing support and a trained workforce. As we know, the offshore wind projects are, you know, complex and they're large. So there is, you know, they tend to have a very long kind of development timeline. There's uncertainties and potential for delays. And the first U.S. projects could be prone to all these risks due to the lack of experience. So, you know, one way to minimize these risks is to really partner with some of the more experienced European developers around the space, and also accessing the IRA tax credits that could help mitigate some of these risks as well. So the industry also requires specialized vessels and port infrastructure to accommodate the large and heavy equipment. And the IRA has tax credits to help with some of these investments, but really regional coordination and additional federal support may be needed as well. And this is the same for the transmission system upgrade and grid upgrades, because you'll need these upgraded transmission lines and grids to really connect these assets to the onshore grid. But overall, the industry will continue to address some of these challenges, and we see that to be continuing going through into 2023 and beyond. So now with that, some of the key takeaways for our renewable trend. So to summarize, the US renewable energy growth continues with a strong demand. There's continuous demand we see across segments, and also with new policies to support this growth. But these growth could continue to be constrained by some of the headwinds we saw and encountered in 2022, particularly around supply chain challenges and interconnection delays. Now, the IRA tax credits could encourage not only renewable energy growth, but also the development of domestic manufacturing supply chains to help ease some of these challenges. And we also see some new opportunities in the clean hydrogen space, as well as improved incentives to bring renewables and clean projects into low-income communities. And as mentioned, there are opportunities in the offshore wind space, but we see there are still a lot of challenges to overcome. But overall, the renewable energy space, we see it to continue to grow strongly, and the attractive long-term incentives are creating some strong tailwinds for the industry, but there are still, a patch of turbulence to really get through. And with that, I'll hand it over to Patty to share our perspectives on the power utilities.
Okay, which way do you do it?
Down.
Okay. All right, this is an interesting slide. So I'm going to talk about power and utilities. Vicky was leaning heavily into renewables, but these are power and utility trends that we're seeing just across all power and utilities. And so this slide is interesting because it's basically saying that 2022 was a year of perils and promise. So on the left side in the black boxes were the perils, and on the right side were the promise that we're seeing, in the power and utility industry. So natural gas prices were high. Coal prices were high, and I'm sure everybody's seen this or experienced this. Inflation was high, interest rates are high. These are all when COVID happened, we had a tremendous amount in power and utilities with supply chain constraints, a lot of delays in construction due to not being able to get equipment that was ordered, that type of thing. And then we also saw the highest costs that we've seen in renewable energy. Vicky had kind of talked about this, but when you look at your capital cost for your levelized cost of entry, for the first time in a decade, we saw actual prices for capital construction costs going up. Year over year, it was 14% and then 13%, and now this year 8%. And those are the numbers for the increases, what we saw happen during the pandemic. So the promise, though, that we're seeing in 2022 is increasing renewable generation, favorable policies. We had the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, in the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA that Vicky was talking about. Rising electricity sales. So when the pandemic first hit in 2020, we saw a lot of people staying home, a lot of manufacturing went down, and we saw that there wasn't as much power generation needs at that time or sales for them. We're seeing surging electric vehicle sales. I think they're calling 6% a tipping point, and so we finally reached where in 2022, where 6% of the sales of vehicles were related to electric vehicles. So, and they're considering that from a technology standpoint to be a tipping point. Yeah, so funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act began flowing into key industry technologies and projects. So we saw $10.5 billion in a Grid Resilience and Innovations Program, GRIP they called it. It was launched to enhance grid resilience and reliability in 2022. There was $2.3 billion announced in funding to the states, tribal nations, and territories under the IIJA to strengthen and modernize the grid. The Department of Energy launched the Regional Clean Hydrogen Hubs program to help jumpstart the U.S. clean hydrogen economy and open applications for $7 billion in funding. So this ties back to the clean hydrogen that Vicky was talking about. And the DOE awarded 20 companies in 12 states a total of more than $2.8 billion to boost domestic production of advanced battery components and the processing of critical minerals. Critical minerals are necessary to build these batteries, and so the DOE is trying to address the ability to have those manufacturing in the United States. As far as the Inflation Reduction Act, what we saw was with those benefits that there was $40 billion invested in clean energy. From August when the IRA was initiated until the end of 2022, and that $40 billion basically was more than the total amount that was invested in clean energy technologies in 2021. All right. Okay, these are the 5 trends that I'm going to talk about until we run out of time. But these are the 5 trends that we're looking at in the power and utilities industry. So the first one is grid modernization. So there's plans for, I guess what they're calling advanced metering initiatives. They had AMI 1, and now they're moving into the second generation of the AMI. ESG reporting, I believe Nick kind of touched on that a little bit before, but it's environmental, social, and governance reporting, and that's continuing to gain momentum. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Grid flexibility, so we have a lot of battery storage deployments that we're seeing coming up now, and the IRA actually offered for the first time an incentive for standalone battery storage. Decarbonized fuels, so power and utility companies will see opportunities to have value from clean hydrogen. So anything that is considered to be decarbonized. And then transportation electrification. So we're looking at a lot for electrical vehicle growth in the upcoming years. And that will actually put a strain on our infrastructure, but utilities are planning for that growth for the transportation electrification. Okay, so this is for the advanced metering infrastructure, the AMI. And so when you had, I think I mentioned that I had solar panels installed on my house like maybe about a month ago. And so where we are right now is they're not generating any power. We're waiting for Duquesne Light to come out and change out my electric meter. And so the electric meter will be more of a type where it would be the AMI 2.0. which is going to be faster processor, more memory, longer lasting battery, and also enhanced cybersecurity and then modular communication capabilities, because with my solar panels, I'll be able to take power in from the grid when I need it, when I'm not generating solar power, but then I will also be able to sell power back out into the grid. So it becomes a different kind of a meter than the conventional old meters that you might have had. It becomes a meter that has more communication capability. So when they put in the original AMI 1, basically there were some utility benefits to the Advanced Metering Infrastructure 1.0. They kind of did away with, meter readers, really. It gave the ability for utilities to have remote meter reading. It also helped us. I had mentioned I did transmission distribution line engineering for 13 years. I was with Deloitte then, and it was a kind of whenever there was a power outage, the only way that we knew at that time, going way back in time, that there was a power outage, it was if somebody called in and said, hey, my power's out. So this AMI 1 gave the ability for the utility to know that somebody's power was out without having to rely upon them calling into the system. I don't know if a lot of people knew that or not. But then, customer benefits. Oh, the other thing is when they moved to AMI 1, I think it was 115 million of these advanced meters that were installed by utilities across the United States. So a big number of them, but it increased billing accuracy and detected theft if somebody was trying to steal meters. Deloitte had we'd have meter readers that would go out and find meters that somebody had pulled out and turned upside down so the meter was spinning backwards, things of that nature. So with these type of meters, it was able to detect theft a lot better. Customer benefits, billing accuracy, able to expedite move-ins and move-outs, because back in the day, you used to have somebody have to go read the meter if you were changing facilities. You were not going to be living in that location anymore. And this enabled the company to not have to be able to just push a button and be able to allow you to move in or out of the house that you were moving in and out of. And so same as Vicky was talking about, that we had the survey. On this here, 53% of the Deloitte Power Utilities survey respondents said that the most important capability that the advanced metering infrastructure could provide would be to support utility flexible load programs with real-time device level usage analysis. So that was what was the most important to our respondents. Okay, so when you look at AMI 1, so what's driving the AMI 2 upgrades? So the AMI were being installed 20 years ago for the infrastructure. And 20 years ago, the component, does anybody know what component would fail on those old meters or first rendition of the AMI meters? It was their battery. So battery has a normal useful life of about 20 years. So they would have to go out and what utilities are doing is because it would require disassembly, instead of trying to disassemble the meter and install a new battery, what they would do is they would go ahead and just replace the meter. So the lifetime of those first run AMI is what's driving them to replace those first generation. And then there's the operational benefits, because it's supporting advanced technologies, like everything's moving to cloud-based, right? So these meters for the AMI2 would also be able to move to cloud-based. So it improves the operational benefits. And then it interacts with the grid, and it's mentioned, and again, about the solar PV photovoltaic panels and electric vehicles. So if you have these AMI 2 meters that you're installed at your house, it gives you flexibility for putting power out into the grid if you have solar panels, and then also the knowledge of if you have an electric vehicle charging, you can maybe charge that vehicle at night and defer cost from peak time to off-peak type time considerations. All right. Anybody have any questions?
So
Is this really interesting? I want to make sure we're doing okay for time. Over here.
Do you see any chance for the cost of power to go down? A lot of people in the room are natural gas providers and producers, and as such, have power bills in the range of tens or 20s of millions of dollars a year. Do you see utility power prices going down?
That's,
Yeah, I can answer.
okay, good.
I think in the short term, I mean, we've seen natural gas come down a little bit now, right, compared to last year. But I mean, in the long-term perspective, we still see natural gas prices to continue to rise. That's just the general trend. If you look at historical electricity prices, they've been trending up, right? So during, there's going to be up and downs, but in the long term, we do feel, electricity prices to be continuing increasing.
Is it going to, Vicky's the income approach person, is it going to increase, analogous with inflation, or is it going to increase more than inflation is increasing? Jeff, just.
Yeah, no, so inflation has a factor, but really what's driving the increase is utilities, right? With all these new generation feeding into the grid, and we see a lot of interconnection delays and challenges. The utilities really there's a need for them to, increase their grid modernization, right? Like Patty will be discussing later. There's a strong need to really, build out new transmissions to support some of these new energy generation going into the grid.
Thank you.
Okay, the next topic, or the next trend in power utilities that we're going to touch on is environmental, social, and governance reporting, ESG reporting. So the thing I just basically wanted to say about that is that there's business requirements, and we're seeing a lot of SEC clients that are posting ESG and sustainability reports as part of their financial portfolio that they're posting, like, for their stakeholders. And they're getting a lot of stakeholder pressure, because if somebody is looking at making an investment in a company, they want to look and see where are they coming out with their ESG reporting. Are they being environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and are they having, the governance reporting that the stakeholders would expect to see. And then we're seeing also evolving regulatory policies, because the SEC came out in May of 2022, and the SEC said that there's going to be a requirement for ESG reporting, but they haven't actually defined. We're expecting guidance on that like any day now. So they're expecting it to be something that's going to, be required for disclosure of their climate-related information. So it was kind of interesting from an ESG standpoint, because I'm an engineer, chemical engineer, and I actually had a project where we were working for a client from an EHS standpoint, which is environmental health and safety, and we were informing that client, or actually doing the cross-section between EHS and ESG, so that they could make a determination of how their EHS statistics would inform their ESG reporting. So that was a pretty interesting project that we did. But favorable, same as your Moody ratings and things of that nature, but favorable ESG ratings can boost your company's access to sustainably linked financing, such as green bonds, and also lower their cost of capital. So this is kind of what we're seeing coming up as far as a trend for 2023 in the future. Also build brand, and then lower risk and penalties for legal repercussions. So more to come on that. Okay, I think I mentioned before that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, actually gave an incentive for standalone battery. Prior to that, in order to get an investment tax credit, you had to have your battery being powered by solar power, but that requirement has gone away. So there's we're basically going to see battery storage deployment. It's going to accelerate, even though there are supply chain snags, the same supply chains that snags that we're seeing everywhere. It's kind of interesting when you look at the utility scale storage capacity installations. I think when they first started at the end of 2021, it was 4.6 gigawatts. They're projecting another 6 gigawatts, or there was 6 gigawatts added in 2022. We're adding 10 and then 12 in 2023 and 2024. So basically, the new storage capacity additions will double by 2024. And where are all these operating battery capacities being installed? And you can see on the block there, basically 55% of it's being installed in California. And then the next highest one would be ERCOT in Texas. Okay, so energy storage demand is going to stay constant. And these are basically the reason, the growth is going to stay constant, and these are the reasons why we're seeing these growth drivers on the battery storage. Growing renewable deployment, and then also arbitrage opportunities, because battery can deploy, it can take the power, it can take the power and then deploy it when rates are high, and so it's kind of like, fueling that up, and it gives you a chance to, change your electricity pricing, basically. And then, as we saw in Texas over the past year, extreme weather events, what happened in Texas with the really cold weather and all the problems that they had in the ERCOT region. There was also retiring coal-fired units and strong policy incentives that we've talked about before, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act. The key challenges that they're seeing in 2023 is still going to be supply chain, which I'm sure that from the folks that deal in the gas, you guys are seeing that as well, right? Okay, so the next trend, and Vicky kind of talked about this too, is going to be the clean hydrogen. We kind of talked about what clean hydrogen is, green power, green hydrogen, which is being electrolysis driven by renewable energy sources. So the incentives, and Vicky already talked about this too, but it's $3 per kilogram for a tax credit for clean hydrogen produced in a qualified facility. And so what this chart over here on the right is trying to show is that with the incentives, like the blue would be without the incentives, and then the brown is with the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit, and then the gray bar going across the middle is gray hydrogen, which is just your regular hydrogen generation. So you can see with the incentives, it actually on the low side makes hydrogen less expensive than the gray hydrogen. On the high side, it's just a little bit higher. All right. So power companies are trying to figure out how to benefit from new hydrogen economics. And so they can take the hydrogen and sell it to an industrial or transportation sector client. They can use it as long duration energy storage, which I think has a lot of potential as well. Hydrogen fuel cells, I'm not still seeing a lot of hydrogen fuel cells out in the marketplace, but it still is a viable opportunity for the use of hydrogen. And it kind of acts like a hydrogen battery. They can use it to decarbonize natural gas distribution systems or use it for baseload power generation. And so there's a couple projects where they're proposing to use hydrogen as a fuel source in like a combined cycle gas turbine facility. So there are gas turbine technologies that are being generated where you can use hydrogen in those instead of natural gas, and it doesn't have the carbon emissions associated with it like the natural gas does. Okay, and the last driver that we're going to talk about, and I think I'll just wrap up after this slide, is the utility electric vehicle planning. So as I said before, the electric vehicles, actually have a tipping point, because in 2022, they were 6% of the new car sales. So a lot of the power and utilities are trying to plan for electric vehicles. They're trying to create the infrastructure that they're going to need so that when people have electric vehicles and they need to charge their electric vehicles, they can drive whatever the duration of the electric vehicle battery is and then have a resource where they can charge it. So similar to we have a gas station infrastructure, it would be an electric infrastructure that can accommodate electric vehicles. And I think the Biden administration has a goal of having electric vehicles be 50% of the vehicles that are on the road by 2030. So I think that's a bit of a stretch goal, but it's still their goal. So these are in green, the clean car states, and then Z, the blue is ZEV, stands for zero emissions vehicles. So these are all the states that have adopted regulations for zero emission vehicles. You can see them kind of congregated on the East Coast and on the West Coast there. So, and we had the folks that we had reached out to as far as what do you believe should be the top priority to prepare and or promote electric vehicle growth, and 43% of our respondents say upgrading the distribution system assets to prepare for increased load. So the utilities are looking at it beyond the EV chargers. They're looking at this as being a big load demand on their future generation. Does anybody have any questions? I think we took up all our time.